incredibly inspiring. I confess, I cried. I was just so amazed by their courage. How difficult it must have been for them to rise up and stand up for their own justice. And it was that courage that I really want to make the theme of my talk tonight. And particularly the message that courage isn't something we have to be born with. It's something that we can actually learn as we go along. And I say this very much from personal experience. As a child, I was not sporty. I absolutely hated physical exercise. When I was at school, I actually did Latin to get out of physical education. When I went to Oxford University, I decided I should really do some exercise, mostly motivated by wanting to be able to eat more without getting fat. I took up rowing. But you can't make a living out of rowing. And so when I graduated in 1989, I did like so many of my peer group did. We all wanted to be either management consultants or investment bankers. And given the recent bad rap that bankers have got, maybe I chose the lesser of the evils in becoming a management consultant. I knew it wasn't really what I wanted to do for a living, but I thought it would serve as a stopgap until I figured out what I really did want to do when I grew up. But 11 years, I was still stuck there in my stopgap, kind of caught up in the salary trap, just doing this job I didn't like to buy stuff I didn't need. I'd grown up in a fairly poor family. Both my parents were Methodist preachers. And so for me, the grass was greener on the other side of the fence. I thought that money would buy me happiness. But after 11 years of trying to buy happiness, I was actually more miserable than ever. Just every day that I got on that commuter train at stupid o'clock in the morning to go and work in my little office cubicle, I just knew there was this growing sense of a discrepancy between the person that I thought I might be on the inside and this person that I was pretending to be on the outside. But I felt so sort of hemmed in, so trapped by the expectations of parents, former teachers, my peer group. It seemed like everybody I knew, we were all like married and mortgaged and doing these kinds of jobs. And I couldn't even imagine what the world beyond might actually look like. And yet there was this deepening crisis. And so in search of an answer to this question, who am I? What am I here for? What do I really want to do with my life? In desperation, I turned to self-help books. This was really dire straits. And in one of those books, I found this exercise that suggested you should write 2 versions of your own obituary. The one that you wanted, and the one that you were heading for if you carried on as you were. And I can remember how I felt as I wrote my fantasy obituary, the kind of person I wanted to be. I thought of the obituaries that I'd read in the newspaper that I'd been really impressed by. And there were these people who seemed to have just got out there and grabbed hold of life by the lapels. They might succeed or they might fail, but no matter what, they would pick themselves up and dust themselves off and try again, always learning something new from the experience. And I can remember how I felt as I finished writing that version of my obituary. I thought, wow, what a great life I've had. I had to go, no, that was only the fantasy one. And so then I wrote the obituary I was actually heading for if I carried on as I was. And you know, it was a nice obituary. It was respectable, it was comfortable, it was what passes for security in this modern world. But I knew by that point that it just wasn't what I wanted. So I wish I could tell you that the very next day I walked into the office and told my boss what to do with his job. But I didn't, because I was a coward. And I think I knew even then that I was going to have to let go of an awful lot of things in my life before I could really set myself onto this new trajectory. But once you know something like that, once you've had that glimpse of what could be, and when it's felt so real to you, so authentic, from then on in, you can't pretend that you don't know it. And so gradually over the course of the next few years, I did duly let go of a lot of those trappings of my old life. The job, Sadly, the marriage as well, although I'm happy to say we remain on good terms. Obviously, then I had to move out of the house too. And as everything got pared away, as I cleared the decks, so to speak, I was able to get a greater clarity about where I really wanted to go with my life. I felt like I was acquiring some valuable life skills. I was starting to get a much better sense of my values. But I just didn't know what the next project was going to be. And it was around this time that an environmental epiphany came and clobbered me over the head. I was reading a book about the Hopi tribe of North America, and like many indigenous people, they understand on a very deep level that our relationship with the earth has to be a reciprocal relationship, a give and take, that we can't just keep on taking, or else our long-term future is not going to look too rosy. And when I read that, I was just staggered that I had never even thought about this before. I'd been one of those people that when they threw something away, they thought it just went away. You know, garbage men came and it vanished. I'd never really thought about the fact that we live on a finite earth and that everything has to end up somewhere. And with all the zeal of the convert, I thought, this is terrible. This is absolutely the #1 issue facing us right now. I have to do whatever I can to talk about sustainability. Not about saving the planet, but actually about saving the humans, because that's what it's really about. But I needed a platform. I needed to find some way of getting people's attention to listen to this environmental message. Being a recovering management consultant was not a great platform. And it was around this time, after my first ever adventure, a 3-month trip to Peru, I became a member of the Royal Geographical Society. And through that, I met a guy who had rowed across the Atlantic with, of all people, his mother. And so the fact that I'd rowed at Oxford, combined with the environmental mission, made me think, maybe that's what I could do. I mean, after all, if someone's mother can do it, just how hard can it be? As I was to find out, extremely hard. People over the years have often asked me, what does it feel like to be a woman in a man's world of adventure? And, you know, it's pretty difficult to compare, because I've never been a man in that man's world, so I can't compare the two. But I must admit, up until that point, I had been an armchair adventurer. I loved reading those books about people climbing mountains or sailing around the world or trekking to the poles. But they all seem to look like this. I obviously lacks the essential prerequisite to an enormous bushy beard.
Yeah, it's hard to grow.
I never thought that it could actually happen until I heard about Dan's mum, at which point it all seemed to start to seem frighteningly doable. So I signed up to do the Atlantic rowing race, which would be 3,000 miles from La Gomera in the Canaries to Antigua in the Caribbean. And this would take place in the winter of 2005. 26 boats set out that year. I was the only solo female. There was one solo guy, and the other crews were 2s and 4s. And I don't know if you remember what else was going on in 2005, but it was the year of Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, yeah.
And it was actually officially the worst year ever for weather in the North Atlantic. There were more tropical storms that year than any other year since records began. I just could not have picked a worse time. But of course I didn't know this when I set out. So I was full of this naive, happy optimism, like this was my perfect project, my platform to save the world. It just felt like I'd been called to do this thing. This was my vision. And when I got out on the ocean, I ran slap bang into the harsh reality of being alone on a 23-foot rowboat on a very rough ocean. For the first 2 weeks, practically every night, I would lie curled up in my cabin in a fetal position, listening to the waves crashing around me, convinced that the boat was going to break apart, or at least that the rudder was going to get ripped off. Very early on, everything started to break. Before I even reached halfway across, all 4 of my oars broke. My camping stove broke. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried a freeze-dried meal reconstituted with cold water. But I wouldn't highly recommend it. Even though I had trained like a maniac for this row, I still developed tendinitis in my shoulders within the first week, plus the common affliction of ocean rowers, which is saltwater sores, somewhere where you really don't want saltwater sores. Very painful indeed. And I fell into this kind of almost a depression. I can remember just feeling so indignant about this. Having this conversation with the ocean, going, I'm out here trying to help you. And you keep beating me up. Will you please just give me a break? But it didn't. And I'm going to show you a couple of little video clips tonight. And this is the first one, showing me having a major pity party.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors, leading you down into my core, where it becomes so numb? The spirit sleeping somewhere cold until you find it there. I'm not having a good day. My right shoulder blade is giving me serious jig. I'm quite a bit of pain with the shoulder and stuff. Not on a cross though. My bum is really sore. Just keep going, just keep rowing. That's the trouble with oceans. It seems to be always not enough of something, or too much of it. Absolute dead calm. And this is choppy compared with what it was like first thing. The wind is pushing me south. It's being pushed north, now south of Antigua, more south. I'm weary and I've been out here for too long and I can't get on the phone to have a whinge to anybody else. Very, very hard going. Oh my God, but it's going to be hard. A strong urge just to curl up in my bunk. Tired, pissed off, sore. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough to take. I was not a happy rower. But like many people in adversity, I found it such an incredible learning opportunity. And I'd like to just share a few of those little things that I figured out for myself while I was out there on the ocean. One was what it really means to get outside of your comfort zone. There was one day when I was rowing along, just really whining and complaining about how uncomfortable I was. I couldn't get comfortable on the rowing seat and my shoulders were hurting, and I was like, why is this so uncomfortable? And then I recalled that in the run-up to the row, I'd done a few media interviews and I'd been asked, why are you doing this? And I burbled away quite happily about wanting to get outside of my comfort zone. And it was in that moment I went, getting outside of my comfort zone is going to be uncomfortable. That's the point.
And the fact that I am so uncomfortable doesn't mean that I'm failing. It actually means that I'm succeeding in what I set out to do. And it's out here in the discomfort zone that I'm really going to learn new things about myself. Another thing was about what my limits are. There were so many times on the ocean when I thought I have absolutely hit my limit of pain, of discomfort, of frustration, of boredom, of terror. And yet, luckily, ocean rowing is logistically very difficult to quit from. When you're right out there in the middle of the ocean, you can come out on deck going, I've had enough, I can't stand it a moment longer. But then you've got a good kind of 1 week cooling off period before the nearest ship could get to you, during which time you've actually figured out just how to deal with this. You feel like you've hit your limit, but when you don't have any choice, you just carry on going through your limit. And when you look back at where you thought the limit was, you find it was actually just a mirage. It was just a figment of your own imagination. And another thing was the vision. I couldn't quit because I had such a strong sense of calling that this was what I was meant to be doing. It was about so much more than just one miserable little woman in a 23-foot rowboat. It was my contribution. It was what I wanted to do for the environment. It wasn't about my suffering. There was this much bigger cause around me, and for that alone, I had to keep on going. And I think having that clear vision, holding true to that, has become one of the most important things to keep me going across the subsequent oceans. Even when I was doing my third ocean, the Indian Ocean, in 2011, even after so much time, I still found it incredibly hard. That was my longest single row. It was 5 months non-stop at sea without seeing a single person or seeing dry land. But the way that I found to deal with big challenges is to keep your eye on the goal, to have that clear vision of how wonderful it's going to be when you achieve what you set out to do. Whether that is rowing across an ocean, or achieving an environmental goal, or completing a project, or the date of the conference, or whatever it is. And then to think about what do you have to do today to get yourself just a little bit closer to that goal. But then don't think about everything else that has to happen in between. Because I found out the hard way that if I thought about all those thousands of miles that I had to row and all of the things that could possibly break or go wrong or get injured on the way, it would just become completely psychologically overwhelming and I would go into a meltdown. So every day I would just get out there, get my backside on that rowing seat, start sticking the oars in the water and just do whatever I could that day to get myself closer to my goal. So when I look back over the last 8 years of my life, I am actually incredibly grateful that I arrived at that really low point in my career, in my marriage, in my life, and decided when I reached that fork in the road to take the ocean less travelled. It's been the most incredibly rewarding experience. And I'm now, I feel, on track for that fantasy of victory, the one that I really wanted. And I wonder, the characters that you're going to see in the Makers movie, like Billie Jean King, they show her looking back on the Battle of the Sexes, that legendary tennis match. And she must feel so proud of what she did for her cause on that day. And so maybe that's something that we can all think about during the course of this conference. What is our cause? What do we want our obituaries to look like? And what can we do every day to move a little bit closer to our goals? So, just in parting, I would like to share a final video clip with you. And this one is the happy one. This is where it all comes good. And after 103 days at sea across the Atlantic, I make landfall in Antigua. I'm reunited with my long-suffering mother. I get a beer in my hand, and all is well with the world.
she comes with a master plan, and I'm starting to lose control. Here she comes to this trashy man, and I'm ready to chase it all and see. Bringing me in, checking me out, making me glorious. Here she comes like a brand new day, belly dancing across the room. In the moonlight, I watch her sway to the rhythm of God's groove with grace. Bringing me in, checking me out, making me glorious. Bringing me in, checking me out, making me glorious.